Okay, so what I want you to do is write me a list. There's 5 things that has been changed or transformed about this function from its parent function, which would have been a parabola, to now it'll be a completely different parabola. And for extra bonus imaginary points, try to do it in the right order. I pause while you do that. All right, so I'm going to do them in the order that we would want you to do it in pre-calc. Now, there are other ways than this, but the way I always show is that you've got to do the inside first. When you're on the inside, everything's opposite of what you'd think. So the order of operations is opposite of what you'd think. Normally in the order of operations, parentheses come first, right? So you go to the opposite of that and you do multiplication first. So that 3 is first. So what does that 3 mean? That does not mean 3 times wider. It means 1/3 as wide. That's a good way to say it. If you didn't say 1/3 as wide, then you better use the word what? Shrink. If you say stretch, you're implying it's getting bigger, and it's not. Shrink of 1/3 or shrink factor of, I'd even accept shrink factor of 3, because if you say the word shrink, I'll know you mean that it's going to divide by 3 or multiply by 1/3. Okay, number 2, second thing. On the inside, the only other thing there is that. So I already learned that a long time ago, right? It's 2 to the which way? Left. It seems like it should be to the right, but it's counterintuitive. 2 to the left. And the third thing. Now you go to the outside. And do you recall that the order of operations there is normally multiplies come before subtracts, and if things are normal on the outside, you do them in the normal order. So multiply comes before subtract. Now of the multiplies, there's a multiply by -1 and a multiply by 1/2, and I've told you to stretch before you flip. Do you remember that? Okay, so stretch is the 1/2 thing, but it's actually not a stretch. It's a shrink factor. I'm going to call it 1/2. You could have said factor 2, but as long as you get across the point, it's half as big. If you said half as tall, that's a good way to say it too. And number 4 is, if you stretch before you flip, this is the flip part. And it's a flip, up-down flip. The official name for that is a flip that goes over this axis. It's up, down, this way, going over this axis, so it's over the x. So it's a reflection over x. Number 5, the last thing is the 5, and that is down 5. Did anybody have it in the perfect order? Ooh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of you. Nice work. It is weird. Okay. So, do you anything you want to ask about this? Like, I don't get when it's this way. Why does that happen? If you have questions, ask. Okay. Then let's talk about pictures. That is a teepee. I like to say teepee. So the little tent or teepee needs to be taller because the guy who lives in there is really tall, and he's like, this place is too short. So if you start out with f of x because you don't know what else to call it, then please tell me, how would you write it to make it 5 times taller? And he'd really like it if his teepee were all in the positives. So he'd like you to move his teepee into quadrant 1. Now, I guess you'd need to know how wide it is here, so we'll say it's like that. Yes, it's not fun to have a tree in your teepee. All right, so tell me what to do to make his teepee 5 times taller and move out into the positives. All right, if you said 5 f of x, you were on the right track. That was 5 times taller. And then moving it to the right, at least 2 would imply where, on the inside or outside? X minus 2 would be the minimum. You could move it, if you just said move it into the positives, you could move it to -3, -4, -5, etc. Okay, any questions? All right. Next thing, I'd like you to sketch me a picture if I did this to it, negative 2f of x minus 1? Oh, fair question. Yeah, I guess it does look like it's about too tall. It's kind of a long, those two's a little bit bigger than they should be, but anyway, we'll say it's too tall. So I'd like you to admit just a sketch, doesn't have to be perfect, of what would happen if I did that. So the test tomorrow, about half of it's graphing like this. You got to be really good at the moving things around, making them shorter, making them taller or wider or narrower. And the other half of the test is on that other stuff where you're tested on, what does a negative on the inside do? Or, like if we do add 5, what does that do? And you say, oh, is it on the inside or the outside? The applications part, like you did for today's homework, that's the little harder part. We're going to save that for for Thursday. And because Thursday's lesson is really short, it's on circles. And so we've got time to do both. Finish up that little applications part. Because if we try to do it all tomorrow, you won't have time. And everybody got all stressed and won't have time to do the hard application problems. Okay. So that'll make it a very reasonable test tomorrow. Okay, so to do what I asked you to do here, first of all, let's talk about doing it in the right order. Remember how I was just saying that it would be smart to do the stuff on the inside first? So that means move the whole thing which way? Right one. Okay, now you don't have to do it this way. You can get there another way, but this is all way that's going to work. And then it's got to be, what's that, negative 2? Should I stretch before I flip? Yeah. Yes, I should. So I should stretch this and make it twice as tall. So now my teepee does not get any wider, but it gets twice as tall. See what I'm doing here? And now the last step is I'm going to flip it. And I'm going to put that down. Which color should I use? I've used everything except green, so let's use green. And say it's about this tall, except it's going down now. Final answer is the green teepee. Raise your hand if you got that. Okay, good. Now if you did it a different way, I know some of you are going to say, but I did it this way, and let's see what happens. Let's start on the outside and do the outside stuff first. And stretch before you flip. All right, I'm going to erase. You just remember where that green one is. If I start on the outside and stretch before I flip, you got to do that. So I do the stretch and make it twice as tall. And then I flip it. Like that. And then I move it to the right one. Look at that. It still worked. Got the same answer. So it is true that you can start on the inside and do all that stuff first, and then go to the outside and do all that stuff. Or you can do it in the opposite order. You can start on the outside first, get all that done, and then go to the inside. Now, why do I want you to start on the inside? Just because all other math problems that you're used to, you always start on the inside. If it's parentheses inside parentheses, you always start on the inside. So it's best to start on the inside just because that's the way we do all the other math problems. Where you get burned is if you start doing something on the inside and then something on the outside and then something back on the inside and then something on the outside. If you jump around, it won't work. Yes? And there are times when you can even do other orders that will work. But the thing I don't want you to come away with thinking is, oh, you can do it in any order you want to, because sometimes it'll work that way. Just like some math problems, you can do them backwards or forwards and the same answer. But not all math problems. Okay. How about this one? It's an M, sort of. I want you to do, what? Ah, yes, the Minnetonka M, except it's in green. Anyway, it's almost like an Edina Minnetonka, which is weird. Anyway, if you do that blue stuff to it, it will be completely different. Give me a little sketch of what it would look like after you did all that to it. And this is kind of a challenge. Good question. I know you can kind of estimate, and we just, if you didn't have to know these marks, but I will make it. It's supposed to be 3 tall, and don't worry that this is slightly shorter than the other side. I'm not going to be that picky. Now, there's 2 ways to do this. You can kind of rough estimate it, which is what I know a lot of you are doing, or if your life depended on it, you might want to make a list of all the important points here, all these points, and then move those points. That is a really good way to do it. Okay, so if I made a list of all these points, it would be -2, 0, and then it would be -1, 3, and then it would be 0, 0, and then it would be 1, 3, and then it would be 2, 0. And then I would do all of these things to it. The stuff on the inside, I'm doing to what? The X or the Y? I'm doing that to the X. So I'd take all my stuff, my X's, and I would do counterintuitive. You would, and this is important now, would I change the sign first, or would I add 2 first? All right. Normally on the order of operations, you would do parentheses first. But since we're on the inside, it's counterintuitive, so we do that first. So we should flip it first. Change its sign, and then add 2. All right, so then if I take all my X's, I change their sign and add 2. So the -2 becomes +2, and I add 2 is 4. -1 becomes +1, and I add 2, it becomes 3. 0 changes to just 0, and then I add 2, and it becomes 2. 1 becomes -1, and then I add 2, and it becomes +1. And 2 becomes -2, and then I add 2, and it becomes 0. All right, and then the Y values. I take all of those, and I got 2 things to do. I got to flip them, and I got to add 1 to them. So I got to change them to the opposite sign and then add 1. Change 0 to the opposite sign, still 0. Add 1 is 1. Change 3 to the opposite sign, -3, and then I add 1, -2. 0 change to the opposite sign, and then add 1 is 1. 3 change it to the opposite sign, -3, and then add 1 is -2. And 0 change to the opposite sign is 0, and then add 1 is 1. Now if I graph all those points, I betcha that they'll be in the same spot as those of you that tried to freehand it. But then again, I would count on this a little bit better than I count on doing it by hand, freestyle. Now I'm going to do it freestyle and just see kind of what I would have done there. Okay, on that note, I would have started on the inside and I would have flipped it left-right. What does this M look like when I flip it left-right? Left-right, not an up-down, left-right. That's still an M, yeah, just looks exactly the same as it was. And then the -2 means actually I move it 2 to the right. So my whole M should now be here instead of where it was. And then the next thing is, if I'm doing it freestyle, I want to do an up-down flip and then move it up 1. Up-down flip kind of makes it go, same as a rotation, like that. And then it needs to go up 1. Boink, there's the final answer. And now I can double check and see if my points actually line up with that. 4, 1, it's right there. 3, -2. 3, -2 is right there. 2, 1, right there. I'm getting excited. I think it worked. 1, -2, yes. And 0, 1, yes. So either way worked. Okay, so you pick. I don't care which way you do it. Just do it right. How many of you are make points people? You like to do it that way? All right. How many of you are freestyle people? All right. I'll warn you on the test. If it's hard one, have a backup strategy. You know what I mean? Be able to do it both ways. Okay, because if it's like, oh, I can't visualize this, the flipping is like, because if it isn't symmetrical like this M, it's really hard to do a freestyle flip of something like that. It's really hard to do that right. Especially if you make it twice as big and then flip it. It's like, yeah, it starts to really stretch your brain. Okay, so know both ways. All right, I intended to give you more time than usual today for homework because it's the last day before the test. And normally I'd say if you have any trouble, come in the morning. But tomorrow's a Wednesday. And Wednesday mornings I can't meet with you because I have to do other meetings. I'm not excited about having meetings to go to. I'd rather just be free. But the point is, I can't help you tomorrow morning, so I can help you now. So we're leaving a half an hour of time here where we can work in class. And here comes your worksheet.